Good evening, friends. Welcome back to another gentle journey through time. Tonight, we'll drift into the medieval world, a place of flickering candlelight, stone walls thick with stories, and customs so beloved that entire villages would gather to celebrate them. But here's the thing. Many of these cherished traditions, these communal joys that cost nothing but a little time and togetherness, eventually caught someone's attention. Someone who saw opportunity. Someone who thought, what if we charged for that? So settle in now. Dim your lights. Let the glow of your screen soften to something barely there. Rest your head on your pillow. Adjust your blankets just so, and allow your breathing to slow. Tonight's story moves like honey dripping from a wooden spoon, thick, golden, unhurried. And if this calm journey helps you unwind, if my voice becomes a soft companion to your dreams, tap like and subscribe, only if it feels right. No pressure, just an invitation. Now, let me tell you about a world where generosity was woven into daily life, where doors stood open and tables were shared, until the day someone decided to put a price on kindness itself. Let me tell you about bread. Not just any bread, but the kind that rose in communal ovens, filling entire villages with that unmistakable scent, yeasty, warm, touched with wood smoke. Close your eyes and imagine it. Early morning in a village somewhere in France, perhaps around the year 1150. The sun hasn't quite broken over the thatched roofs yet, and mist clings to the ground like a shy cat. In the center of the village stood an oven. Not a little thing you'd tuck into a corner, but a massive stone structure with an arched opening, built by the entire community years before anyone living could remember. This was the common oven, the four banal as it was called in medieval France, and it belonged to everyone and no one all at once. Picture this: a woman named Marguerite, her hands dusted white with flour, carries a wooden board balanced on her hip. On it rests a round of dough she kneaded before dawn, her fingers working the mixture while her children still slept. She's not alone. Behind her comes Alan with his loaves, and then Beatrice, and then old Thomas, who always shapes his bread into little braided knots because, he says, it reminds him of his mother's hands. They gather at the oven, where Henri the baker, chosen by the village, not owning the oven but tending it, has been stoking the fire since the first bird sang. The stones inside glow with heat, radiating warmth that makes everyone draw a little closer on cool mornings. There's something almost magical about it, the way the oven transforms these humble rounds of flour and water into something golden, something that cracks when you tear it, revealing a tender, steaming interior that tastes like comfort itself. No one pays Henri. Well, not exactly. Sometimes Marguerite brings him a small cheese. Alan might share some ale. Beatrice offers eggs from her hens. It's an exchange, sure, but it's soft around the edges, never tallied, never demanding. The oven belongs to the commons, to the shared space of village life, and the bread that emerges from it carries that same spirit. It's nourishment born of cooperation. Think of it like a potluck, if you will, but instead of everyone bringing a finished dish, they're all participating in the creation together. The oven's heat is shared, the space is shared, the knowledge of when the bread is perfectly done, that's shared too. Henri knows, just by the smell, just by the particular shade of golden brown, exactly when to slide the long wooden paddle in and retrieve each loaf. Children play nearby, rolling hoops and chasing each other between the cottages, and the warm smell of baking bread becomes the backdrop to their laughter. It's the scent of home, of safety, of a village that functions like a single organism, each person a necessary part. But let me tell you what happened next, because this is where the story shifts, where something beautiful begins to calcify into something else entirely. One day, let's say it's a Tuesday in autumn, leaves turning copper and gold, the air crisp enough to make your breath visible, the lord of the manor, the local noble who technically owns the land everyone farms, rides through the village. His name is Guillaume, and he's been away for months, off doing whatever nobles do, attending tournaments, arguing with other nobles, eating food that takes 4 people to prepare. Guillaume looks around his village with fresh eyes, perhaps eyes that have seen how other lords manage their estates, how they extract more from their lands and their people. He sees the common oven, sees the smoke rising cheerfully from its chimney, sees the villagers gathering with their dough and their easy laughter. And he thinks, that's mine. That oven stands on my land. Those stones were quarried from my quarry. Why am I not benefiting from this? By the spring of the following year, Guillaume had issued a decree. The common oven is no longer quite so common. Oh, the villagers can still use it. He's not a monster, after all, but now there's a fee. A small one, he insists. Just a portion of each loaf baked. Or a few coins. Or perhaps a chicken once a month. The details vary depending on who's asking and what Guillaume thinks they can afford. Marguerite still brings her dough, but now Henri the baker must collect payment. The warm communal feeling begins to cool, just slightly, like bread left too long on the windowsill. Old Thomas grumbles, his braided knots somehow less cheerful now that they come with an invoice attached. Some villagers try to build their own ovens in their cottages. But here's the thing about medieval ovens. They're not just large, they're dangerous. A proper bread oven needs serious heat, serious ventilation, and serious skill to prevent your thatched roof from catching fire. Most households can't manage it, or can't afford the fuel, or simply don't have the space. They're trapped, in a way, dependent on the very structure that once represented their independence. The bread still rises. It still smells wonderful. It still tastes of wheat and salt and the particular water from the village well. But something intangible has changed. The loaves are heavier now, not in texture but in feeling, weighted with obligation and resentment. Guillaume profits nicely. He adds a new tapestry to his hall, something with threads of gold depicting a hunting scene. It's quite lovely if you like that sort of thing. And the villagers? They adapt because that's what people do. They pay their fees, they bake their bread, they continue. But on quiet mornings, when Marguerite needs her dough before dawn, she remembers when the oven was truly theirs, when bread was a gift the village gave itself, and she needs a little more forcefully, working something angry and sad into the dough, though by the time it's baked, you'd never know. The bread looks perfect, golden, normal. That's how it goes sometimes. The thing that nourishes you stays the same shape, the same color, but tastes different once someone decides it should cost more than kindness. Let your mind rest now on that image. A village at dawn, smoke rising from a stone oven, the the scent of bread mingling with mist, and the quiet transformation of joy into transaction, slow as dough rising, inevitable as morning. And now, let your mind drift to another common treasure that couldn't stay free forever. Imagine a forest. Not the dark, tangled, fairy tale kind full of wolves and witches, though those existed too, but a different sort. A working forest, a living forest, where light filters green through oak and beech leaves, where the ground is soft with centuries of leaf fall, where mushrooms push up through the loam like little umbrellas after rain. This is the common forest, the Silva communis, and for hundreds of years it belonged to everyone who lived nearby. Not in the sense that they owned it legally. Ownership is a complicated thing in medieval times, all bound up with feudal rights and ancient traditions, but in the sense that they used it freely and fully as their ancestors had done back beyond memory. Let me walk you through a day in such a forest, somewhere in England, let's say around 1220. The morning is cool, the kind where dew hangs on every blade of grass and spider webs become visible, outlined in tiny droplets like strings of pearls. A man named Edmund enters the forest with his son, Robin, who's perhaps 10 years old and still thinks the world is mostly adventure. They're carrying axes, but not for cutting timber, not the tall, straight oaks that might become ship masts or building beams. No, they're after smaller stuff, deadfall branches for their fire, a bit of coppiced hazel for fence repairs, some ashwood that's particularly good for making tool handles. The forest provides all of this, generously, continuously. As long as you don't take the living trees, as long as you respect the balance, there's plenty for everyone. A little deeper in Edmund and Robin encounter Agnes, an older woman with hands that know every plant worth knowing. She's collecting mushrooms, not the regular ones you'd find in any meadow, but special forest varieties. Chanterelles, maybe glowing golden against the dark earth, or penny buns with their plump brown caps. She'll dry some for winter, trade some for cloth or salt, eat the rest with wild garlic and a bit of old bread fried in pork fat until everything is crispy and savory and so good it makes you close your eyes with pleasure. Agnes also knows where the wild bees nest. She won't take all their honey, that would be foolish and wrong, but she'll take enough, smoking them gently with damp leaves until they're calm, lifting out a comb dripping with amber sweetness. Forest honey tastes different from meadow honey, darker, more complex, with notes of whatever flowers the bees found in the shaded glades. It's the kind of honey that makes you slow down, that makes you savor each spoonful like the treasure it is. The forest gives other gifts too. Acorns and beech mast for the pigs, who are driven in during autumn to fatten up before winter. Wild strawberries, tiny and intensely flavored, nothing like the big watery ones from later centuries. Blackberries that stain your fingers purple and taste of late summer. Hazelnuts that you crack with your teeth, the shells scattering, the kernels sweet and oily. There are birds to trap, not too many, just enough. Rabbits, if you're clever with snares. Deer if you're very lucky and very careful, though technically those belong to the Lord and poaching carries severe penalties. But a clever villager who happens upon a deer that's injured itself, well, that's nature's way, isn't it? And nature's gifts should be accepted. Children gather here too, playing elaborate games among the trees, building forts from fallen branches, learning the forest's rhythms and secrets. Old men sit on stumps and tell stories, their voices blending with the rustle of leaves overhead. Young couples slip away into quiet clearings, finding privacy among the ferns and soft moss. The forest is a pantry, playground, workshop, and cathedral. It's where you go to think, to gather, to breathe air that tastes green and alive. And you knew there would be a but, didn't you? This abundance, this freedom, this common right, it catches attention. The same Lord, Guillaume, or perhaps his son, let's call him Robert, because Roberts have a way of causing trouble in medieval England, looks at the forest and sees not community resources but wasted profit. He's been talking with other nobles, comparing notes on estate management. He's heard about forest law, those special regulations the king uses to protect royal hunting grounds. Robert thinks, why shouldn't I do the same? So gradually, over the course of a few years starting around 1225, the rules changed. First, small restrictions, you can't take wood without permission. Then, you need to pay a fee for that permission. Then, you can't graze your pigs during certain months. The mushroom gathering that Agnes has done her entire life? That requires a license now. Honey, that's theft, technically, because all products of the forest belong to the Lord. Edmund finds himself paying for the privilege of collecting deadfall, paying for something that was literally lying on the ground rotting. Robin, now a teenager, learns that the forest of his childhood is no longer a place of freedom but a place of restriction, every stick and stone accounted for, every action monitored by foresters, men hired by Robert to patrol and enforce and collect. Agnes grows too old to gather mushrooms by the time the laws become truly restrictive, so perhaps she's spared the worst of it. But her daughter, who learned everything from her mother, now hoards her knowledge secretly, gathering only at night, only in hidden places, always afraid of being caught. The forest is still there, of course. The trees don't know they've been privatized. The mushrooms still push up through the earth, the honey still accumulates in wild hives, the deadfall still falls. But the people's relationship to it has changed fundamentally. What was once a generous commons becomes a locked storehouse, access granted only to those who can pay. Some villagers try to resist. There are small acts of defiance, taking wood anyway, releasing trapped rabbits from the Lord's snares, accidentally letting pigs wander into restricted areas. Occasionally these small rebellions become larger ones. History records various uprisings, petitions, conflicts over common rights that sometimes turn violent. But mostly people adapt. They pay the fees, or they do without, or they find alternative sources that are lesser, harder, meaner. Instead of gathering fallen oak branches, they burn firs and bracken that smokes badly and gives less heat. Instead of wild honey, they learn to live with less sweetness in their lives. Robert prospers. He builds a larger manor house. He imports wine from Gascony, spices from the east. He doesn't think much about Edmund or Agnes or the children who used to play among his trees. Why would he? The forest is his, legally and completely. He's only claiming what's rightfully his property. But on quiet evenings, when wind moves through those same oaks and beeches, when leaves rustle and acorns drop and the earth slowly, patiently reclaims every branch that falls, the forest remembers. It remembers when human feet walked freely beneath its canopy, when gathering was giving, when abundance was understood not as something to hoard but as something to share. And if you listen very carefully, if you quiet your breathing and let your thoughts slow down and drift, you can almost hear it. The forest as it was, the forest as it might have been, the forest that exists in the space between ownership and freedom, belonging to everyone and no one, generous as rain. Rest now in that green shade, that dappled light, that soft forest floor. And now, let your mind drift to the village mill, where grain became flour and nothing was ever simple again. Let's talk about grain for a moment. Wheat, barley, rye, oats. The staff of life, they called it, and for good reason. These humble seeds, when ground into flour, became the foundation of nearly every meal. But here's the thing about grain. It's remarkably hard. You can't just chew a wheat kernel and expect much. You need to grind it, crush it, break down those tough outer shells to release the starchy, nutritious interior. For most of human history, this was done by hand. A stone mortar and pestle, hours of grinding, arms aching, the rhythmic sound of stone on stone becoming a meditation or a misery depending on your mood. It was hard work, the kind that made your shoulders burn and your hands blister. But then, sometime in the mists of early medieval ingenuity, someone figured out how to make water do the work. Picture a stream. Let's place it in a village in what would become Germany, around the year 1100. The water runs year-round, fed by springs in the hills above, reliable as seasons. And beside this stream, the villagers have built something remarkable, a watermill. It's a beautiful piece of cooperative engineering. A wooden wheel, perhaps 15 feet across, mounted horizontally so the stream's current pushes against its paddles. The wheel turns, and through a clever system of gears and wooden mechanisms, this turning motion drives a heavy stone, the millstone, around and around on top of another fixed stone. Pour grain into the gap between the stones, and out comes flour, fine and pale, ready for baking. The mill belongs to the community. They built it together, hauling timbers from the forest, back when that was allowed, shaping stones, digging channels to direct water flow at optimal speed. It took months of work, everyone contributing skills and labor. Jürgen the carpenter did most of the woodwork. Hildegard, who had a knack for understanding mechanical things, figured out the gear ratios. Klaus, blessed with a strong back and patience, shaped the millstones until they sat just right, not too close or they'd spark and burn the flour, not too far or the grind would be too coarse. When it was finished, everyone celebrated. There was beer. There's always beer in medieval Germany, and roasted sausages, and someone played a fiddle while children danced and adults clapped. The mill represented progress, efficiency, freedom from the grinding labor that had claimed so many hours from so many days. And the best part? Everyone could use it. You'd bring your grain, wait your turn if others were there before you, exchanged news and gossip while the millstones rumbled and the water wheel creaked. The miller, a position that rotated among families, changing each season so no one bore the responsibility or reaped the benefits too long, would help you pour the grain, adjust the flow, and collect your flour. In return, you'd leave a small portion, maybe 1/20th of your flour, to compensate for the miller's time. Or perhaps you'd bring the miller a couple of eggs, or help repair the mill's roof when winter storms tore at the shingles, or offer to mind their children while they worked. It was loose, flexible, based on relationships rather than rigid accounting. The mill became a social hub. Women would gather there, sharing the work of hauling grain and carrying flour back home. They'd exchange recipes. Did you know that if you mix rye flour with a bit of old beer, the bread rises lighter? Or that barley flour makes excellent flat cakes when fried with onions and a scraping of lard, all crispy around the edges and soft in the middle? Men would gather there too, especially in winter when field work was scarce. They'd help with repairs, or simply sit and talk, watching the wheel turn, the steady splash and thrum of water against wood creating a backdrop to conversation. There's something hypnotic about a watermill, something that invites you to slow down, to match your breathing to the wheel's rotation, to let your thoughts drift along with the stream. Children loved the mill. They'd play in the stream below, carefully, because everyone knew water could be dangerous, and they'd beg to help pour the grain into the hopper, thrilled when the miller let them, watching the golden kernels disappear into the stones and emerge as powder, transformed like magic. The flour that came from the communal mill had a particular quality. Maybe it was just imagination, but people swore it tasted better, made better bread, seemed blessed somehow by the cooperative spirit of its creation. When you needed dough made from that flour, you were working with the effort of your entire village. The farmers who grew the wheat, the people who built and maintained the mill, the miller who helped you grind it, the stream itself, flowing cold and clear from the hills. It was beautiful, really. One of those small perfect systems where everyone contributes and everyone benefits and the whole thing works because no one is trying to take too much. But of course, and you can hear it coming now, can't you, like distant thunder on a summer afternoon, this couldn't last. The local lord, perhaps the same Robert from our forest story, grown older now, perhaps around 1230, looks at the mill with calculating eyes. He's been studying his account books, those long parchment rolls where scribes record every chicken and bushel of wheat, and he realizes that the mill represents significant value flowing through his domain completely untaxed. He inquires with his advisors, who pull out old documents and point to ancient rites, and together they construct an argument. The stream, technically, flows through the Lord's land. The mill, therefore, sits on the Lord's property. By rights of feudal law, it belongs to him. The villagers protest, of course. We built it, they say. We've maintained it for generations. It's ours. But ownership in medieval times is a tricky thing, all tangled up with concepts of lordship and vassalage and grants and charters. Robert has documents, or at least his scribes can produce documents that look old and official. And he has power, armed men, the backing of law, the authority to punish resistance. So the mill changes hands. Or rather, it stays exactly where it is, but its nature transforms. Now it's a banal mill, a mill you must use by law if you live in this village. And for this mandatory use, you must pay, not a voluntary contribution of eggs or flour or labor, but a fixed portion, carefully measured. 1/10 of your grain, to be precise, collected before it's even ground, so there's no chance of underreporting. Robert installs his own miller now, someone loyal to him, someone who watches the grain being poured in and calculates the Lord's share with precision. The miller is no longer your neighbor rotating through a shared duty. He's an agent of extraction, pleasant enough perhaps, but fundamentally on a different side of the transaction. The social atmosphere changes. The mill is quieter now, less laughter, fewer lingering conversations. People come, grind their grain, pay their portion, live. The sense of cooperative creation has evaporated like morning mist in the strong sun. Some villagers try to grind grain at home, returning to the old mortar and pestle method. But Robert has anticipated this. He declares it illegal to grind grain anywhere but his mill. Violators will be fined, or worse. His men patrol, listening for the telltale sound of stone on stone, confiscating handmills when they find them. Hildegard, who helped design the mill's gears all those years ago, is an old woman now. She sits by her fire on winter evenings, her hands twisted with age, and remembers when the mill was theirs, when the sound of the water wheel was a sound of pride and community. Now it's just another burden, another place where the Lord's hand reaches into peasant life and takes. The bread still rises. The flour is ground just as fine. Practically speaking, little has changed. The same water turns the same wheel and turns the same stones. But everything has changed. The mill grinds grain, yes, but it also grinds something less tangible, the sense of common purpose, the feeling that working together creates something that belongs to everyone. Now it creates profit for one man and obligation for everyone else. Robert, to be fair, uses some of the income to maintain the mill well. It never falls into disrepair on his watch. He even improves it, installing a second wheel to double capacity. Efficiency increases. Production increases. By any economic measure, it's a success. But on quiet mornings, when mist rises from the stream and the wheel turns through empty air, waiting for the day's work to begin, something feels absent. A ghost of generosity, perhaps. A memory of when the mill's grinding rhythm was the sound of neighbors helping neighbors, not subjects serving lords. Let that sound lull you now. The splash of water, the creak of wood, the steady rumble of stone on stone, grinding grain into flour, joy into obligation, commons into property, round and round and round. And now, let your mind drift to the village feast, where everyone brought something and everyone ate, until someone decided hunger itself could be profitable. Close your eyes and imagine the smell. Roasting meat, a whole pig, probably, turning slowly over an open fire, skin crackling and golden, fat dripping down to hiss and flare in the flames. Nearby, enormous pots of pottage bubbling away, that thick medieval stew made of whatever was available, beans, onions, cabbage, root vegetables, all swimming together in a broth flavored with herbs and maybe a ham bone if someone felt generous. Bread, of course, mountains of it, all shapes and sizes. And pies, savory ones filled with birds or eels or mushrooms, sweet ones filled with dried fruits soaked in honey and spices. There are cheeses, soft and hard, sharp and mild. Butter churned just yesterday, still smelling faintly of the cow. Beer in barrels, mead in jugs, cider going slightly fizzy in the cool autumn air. This is a feast day. Maybe it's Michaelmas, around September 29th, when the harvest is mostly in and there's reason to celebrate. Or perhaps it's the feast of the village's patron saint, or midsummer, or any of the dozens of occasions that medieval villages used as excuses to gather and eat and drink and forget, for a little while, the hard realities of agricultural life. Let me take you to such a feast, somewhere in the English countryside, let's say around 1260. The location is the village green, that common space where the grass is worn down by feet and hooves, where the ancient oak spreads its branches wide enough to shade half the gathering. Every household has contributed something. The widow Marjorie, who's clever with pastry, has made a dozen small tarts filled with wild strawberry preserves. Tom the plowman and his wife have brought a whole wheel of cheese, the product of their summer's dairying. The Fletcher family roasted a goose. A goose? That's a luxury, but they had a particularly good year and wanted to share their fortune. Notice that word, share. That's what this is about. Not buying, not selling, but sharing. The feast belongs to everyone because everyone has contributed to it. Even the poorest families, who might only bring a loaf of dark rye bread or a string of onions, are welcome. No one is counting exactly who brought what. No one is calculating the value of each contribution and ensuring equal return. Children run wild, allowed to stay up late, their faces smeared with grease and berry juice. Young men show off, competing in impromptu wrestling matches or foot races. Young women laugh and flirt and pretend not to notice the young men. Old folks sit in places of honor, telling stories that get more embellished with each retelling and each cup of ale. There's music, someone with a drum, someone else with a flute, a third person who knows all the old songs and leads the singing. The music is simple but joyful, the kind that makes your foot tap even if you're trying to sit still. People dance, clumsy and enthusiastic, following patterns passed down through generations. The priest is there too, Father Benedict, who's conveniently forgotten his usual stern warnings about gluttony and excess. Even he is smiling, accepting a generous portion of roasted pork, blessing the gathering with words about community and thanksgiving and God's provision. As night falls, torches are lit. The fire's glow turns faces warm and golden. The feast continues, slowing down but not stopping, people eating more slowly now, drinking more steadily, conversations getting louder and more philosophical the way they do when beer has been flowing freely. This is the social glue that holds the village together. In a world where life is hard, where winter always comes, where disease and accident and bad weather can destroy everything you've worked for, these moments of collective joy are essential. They remind you that you're not alone, that you're part of something larger, that your neighbors will celebrate with you in good times and help you in bad times. The food itself becomes a kind of communion. When you eat Tom's cheese, you're tasting his care for his cows, his wife's skill at churning and aging. When you bite into Marjorie's tart, you're tasting her patience in gathering wild strawberries one by one, her knowledge of just how much honey to add, her generous spirit in spending a whole day baking for others. It's beautiful, isn't it? Hold on to that feeling for a moment. The warmth of the fire, the sound of laughter and music, the taste of good food shared freely, the sense of belonging. Now let me tell you what changed. By the 1280s, the same patterns of enclosure and privatization that affected mills and forests and ovens had crept into feast days too. It happens subtly at first. The local lord, perhaps Robert's son Henry, suggests that it would be more organized, more proper, if the feast were held in his courtyard rather than on the common green. He has more space, he says, and better facilities. He can provide the pig for roasting. He has plenty and barrels of better beer than the village usually manages. It sounds generous. Many villagers are pleased. Less work for them, after all, if the Lord is providing the main elements of the feast. But the next year, when the feast comes around again, there's a difference. Yes, the Lord provides the pig and the beer, but now there's an entrance requirement. Not money, exactly, that would be too crude, but a gift. Chicken, perhaps, or a quantity of eggs, or a day's labor in the Lord's fields. Something of value, carefully calculated to be just a bit more than what most villagers would have contributed to the old communal feast. And suddenly, the dynamic has shifted. It's no longer a feast where everyone contributes what they can and everyone partakes freely. It's become a transaction. The Lord provides, and the villagers pay, and if you can't afford the entrance requirement, well, perhaps you can watch from outside the courtyard walls, but you won't be eating. The poorest families who once brought only a little but were welcomed warmly now face a choice. Pay the entrance fee you can't really afford, or skip the feast entirely and feel the sting of exclusion. Most skip it. They have their own small meal at home, trying not to hear the music and laughter from the Lord's courtyard, trying not to feel bitter about being shut out of what used to be theirs. The food at the Lord's feast is actually better, in a way. There's more meat, more variety, more of the expensive items like white bread and spiced wine. Henry has imported delicacies, candied ginger, perhaps, or those fashionable almond pastries called marchpane. It's impressive, but Marjorie doesn't make her strawberry tarts anymore. Why bother when the Lord is providing everything? Her particular skill, her small contribution, is no longer needed or wanted. Tom still has his cheese, but he gives it to the Lord as part of his entrance fee, and then sees it served back to him at the feast, and something about that transaction makes the cheese taste different. Less like generosity, more like obligation. The feast is louder now, more extravagant, but somehow less joyful. People are guests rather than hosts, consumers rather than contributors. They sit at the Lord's tables, eat the Lord's food, drink the Lord's beer, and there's a weight to it, an imbalance. Gratitude is owed. Deference is expected. Henry doesn't see the problem. From his perspective, he's being magnificently generous, feeding the village at considerable expense. The fact that the gifts he requires roughly cover his costs is just good management. And really, isn't his feast better than the scraggly affairs the villagers used to put together themselves? More food, better quality, professional entertainers instead of Tom's cousin who knows 3 songs on a half-broken fiddle? But something essential has been lost. something that can't be measured in pounds of pork or gallons of beer. The feast used to be a manifestation of community, of mutual care, of the village's ability to create joy together. Now it's a demonstration of the Lord's wealth and power, of the village's dependence on his largesse. Father Benedict, older now and perhaps wiser, attends the Lord's feast but seems less merry than he used to be. He remembers the old feasts on the village green, remembers blessing food that came from 100 different hands, remembers the particular warmth that came from shared creation rather than shared consumption. Late at night, after most have stumbled home, Benedict sits near the dying fire and thinks about communion, the bread and wine that he transforms each Sunday, the mystery of sharing that makes a community into something more than just individuals occupying the same space. He thinks about how the old feasts were a kind of communion too, secular and messy but genuine. And he wonders when exactly abundance became scarcity, when having more food meant less satisfaction, when the feast day stopped being a celebration of what the village could create together and became instead a reminder of what the village needed from their Lord. The fire burns down to embers, glowing soft and red in the darkness. The courtyard empties. The tables will be cleared in the morning. The villagers will return to their work, their regular meals of bread and pottage, their regular lives that feel a little smaller now, a little more constrained, though they'd be hard-pressed to explain exactly why. And somewhere, in a cottage at the edge of the village, Marjorie pulls out her old tart recipe, written on a scrap of parchment in handwriting that's gotten shakier over the years. She traces the words with one finger: wild strawberries, honey, pastry dough, and remembers when these instructions created joy that belonged to everyone. Then she puts the recipe away, carefully, in a wooden box with other precious things. Perhaps someday, she thinks, perhaps someday the feast will return to the green, will return to the people, and will return to being a gift instead of a purchase. Perhaps. Let that perhaps echo in your mind now, gentle as a prayer, soft as hope, quiet as embers cooling in the night. And now, let your mind drift to the healer's garden, where cures grew freely until someone decided wellness should cost. Picture a garden. Not the neat rows of a modern vegetable patch, but something wilder, more varied, bordered by a low stone wall or a woven willow fence. The plants grow in apparent chaos: tall fennel waving feathery fronds, low-growing chamomile spreading like a fragrant carpet, sage bushes with their gray-green leaves, lavender spikes humming with bees, yarrow with clusters of tiny white flowers. This is a healing garden, and it belongs to a woman named Eluned, here in a Welsh village around the year 1270. Eluned learned herbcraft from her mother, who learned it from her mother, knowledge passed down through generations of women who paid attention, who noticed which plants helped which ailments, who experimented and remembered and shared. The garden isn't really hers in any legal sense. She doesn't own the land, but it's hers through cultivation, through knowledge, through care. She knows every plant intimately. She knows that chamomile flowers should be picked in the morning after the dew dries but before the sun gets too hot, when their oils are strongest. She knows that yarrow stops bleeding, that feverfew helps headaches, that willow bark chewed slowly eases pain and fever. When someone in the village falls ill, they come to Eluned. Not to buy medicine, that's not how this works. but to ask for help. She never turns anyone away. She walks through her garden, selecting plants with the confidence of long practice, explaining as she gathers, "This mint will settle your stomach. Brew it as a tea, drink it warm, 3 cups a day until you feel better. And here, take some of this ginger root. Yes, I know it's precious, but you need it more than I do. Grate it fine and add it to the mint tea. You'll feel relief within a day." For a child's cough, she might prepare a syrup from honey and horehound, painstakingly simmered until the herb releases its healing properties into the sweetness. The honey is from her own hives, 3 skeps tucked against the sunny side of her cottage wall, and it's already medicine by itself, soothing throats and providing energy. For wounds, she has a salve made from calendula petals steeped in rendered fat, bright yellow and smelling of summer. She spreads it gently on cuts and burns, bandaging them with clean linen, showing the injured person or their family how to change the dressing, how to watch for signs of infection. For the old folks with aching joints, she recommends baths infused with rosemary and comfrey, and makes pouches of dried lavender to tuck into bed linens, claiming it helps sleep but really just wanting to bring some small comfort into lives made difficult by pain and age. People pay her, in a sense, but not with money. There's not much coin circulating in this village anyway. They pay with gratitude and reciprocity. The blacksmith, whose daughter Elunid helped through a difficult fever, repairs her garden tools without being asked. The shepherd, whose lambs will make excellent bandages when washed and softened, makes sure Elunid always has some. The baker's wife brings bread, the cheesemaker brings cheese, the children bring wildflowers they've picked, which Elunid accepts gravely as if they're as valuable as any medicine. It's a web of mutual care, with Elunid at one node but not at the center. Everyone takes care of everyone else in different ways. She heals the baker's wife's headaches, the baker's wife provides bread, the baker provides heat to Elunid's home when she's too sick to tend her fire, and on, round and round, no one keeping precise tally because that's not the point. Elunid's garden is also a gathering place. Women especially come to sit on the stone bench by the lavender to talk while Elunid works. They discuss their ailments, yes, but also their lives, their worries, their joys. The healing that happens here is as much about being heard and supported as it is about the plants. Elunid has learned that sometimes the best medicine is simply listening, nodding, saying, "Yes, that sounds hard," and meaning it. She teaches, too, freely and openly. When a young woman shows interest in the plants, Elunid explains everything she knows. "Don't gatekeep knowledge about healing," her mother told her once. The more people who know how to help, the healthier everyone is. So she shows which leaves to pick, how to dry them properly, how to know when a tea is too strong or too weak. This sharing of knowledge means that most people in the village know at least basic herbcraft. They can treat minor ailments themselves. But for anything serious or uncertain, they still come to Elunid, trusting her deeper knowledge, her experience, her intuition about illness and remedy. The system works beautifully for years, decades even. Elunid grows older, trains her daughter Branwen in the craft. The garden continues, the healing continues, the web of care continues. But, and here it comes, that familiar pattern. the local lord notices. Or rather, the lord's new wife notices. She's from a more urban area, more familiar with the growing professionalization of medicine, the physicians in cities who charge fees and wear special robes and claim authority based on books rather than experience. She looks at Eluned's garden and sees disorder. She looks at Eluned's practice and sees unlicensed activity that should be regulated. The lady suggests to her husband that medicine should be controlled, managed, and made official. It's for the people's own safety, she argues. How do they know Eluned isn't accidentally poisoning people with her remedies? Shouldn't there be some oversight, some qualification required? The Lord, always looking for new revenue streams, sees opportunity. By 1290, he issued regulations. Anyone practicing medicine must have a license, which costs a not insignificant fee to obtain and must be renewed annually. The license requires proving knowledge to an examiner, a physician from the nearest town who knows book learning but can't tell chamomile from chickweed in an actual garden. Eluned takes the examination. The physician asks her questions about the four humors, about bloodletting, about Galen and Hippocrates, none of which she knows or particularly believes in. Her knowledge is practical, experiential, based on what works rather than what ancient texts claim. She fails. Without a license, she's forbidden to practice medicine. The garden is still hers. They can't take that away, but she cannot give anyone medicine from it. Cannot offer advice. Cannot help, not legally. Branwen is devastated. The village is shocked. This is Eluned, who's been healing their hurts and illnesses for 40 years, who's delivered half the babies currently running around the village green. How can she be unqualified? But the law is clear. The Lord's men enforce it. The first time someone reports seeing Eluned give a sick child some medicine, she's fined heavily. The second time, she's threatened with imprisonment. So Eluned stops, publicly at least. The garden remains, but she tends it differently now, more quietly. People still come, but furtively, after dark, knocking softly on her door. She still helps, because she cannot turn away suffering, but now there's fear woven through every interaction. Both she and her patients are breaking the law, risking punishment for the crime of caring without official permission. The Lord, meanwhile, has brought in a licensed physician. The man is competent enough, trained in the classical tradition, believing strongly in the efficacy of bloodletting and purging for nearly every ailment. He sets up practice in a room at the manor house and announces his fees: 2 pennies for a consultation, more for medicines, more still for procedures. 2 pennies is beyond most villagers' means for anything but the most desperate situations. So illnesses that Eluned would have treated early, preventing them from worsening, now progress untreated until they become emergencies. People suffer longer, more intensely. Some die who might not have died if they'd gotten help sooner. The physician finds village life frustrating. These people are so poor, so ignorant. They won't pay for his services, and when they do finally come, their ailments are so advanced that his treatments often fail. He writes letters to colleagues in the city complaining about the backwardness of country folk, never considering that the very system he's part of has made them sicker. Eluned's garden begins to look neglected, not because she stopped caring for it, but because her heart is heavy. She still harvests, still dries herbs, but now she stores them in jars that line her shelves, waiting for she knows not what. Sometimes she walks through the garden at twilight, touching the plants gently, talking to them like old friends, apologizing for the world that's made even kindness illegal. Branwen tries to get a license herself. She studies, learns the book answers, takes the examination. She passes. She's young enough to memorize the theories the physician wants to hear. But the license costs more than her family has, and the annual renewal fee means she'd need to charge for her services to afford it. Once you're charging, you can't really help the poorest families anymore. They simply can't pay. So Branwen faces a choice. Practice legally but excludingly, helping only those who can afford her, or practice illegally but universally, helping everyone and risking punishment. She chooses a middle path, gets the license, charges small fees when people can pay but treats many for free, and hopes the Lord doesn't audit her practice too carefully. It's not the same though. The easy reciprocity is gone. Now there's awkwardness. Can I pay next month? I don't have anything to give you right now. I'm so sorry. And Branwen has to say, it's fine, don't worry, but it's not fine. The system has made everyone uncomfortable, turned healing from a communal practice into a transaction fraught with obligation and shame. One cold winter night, a child develops a croup, that barking cough that can close a small throat completely. The parents are new to the village, don't know about Elunid's underground practice, and can't afford the licensed physician's fees. They try to treat the child themselves, unsuccessfully. By the time they finally scrape together enough to see the physician, it's too late. The child dies. Elunid hears about it the next morning. She sits in her garden, even though it's cold, even though frost has blackened most of her plants. She knows she could have saved that child. A simple croup tent, a pot of steaming water infused with eucalyptus and thyme, a cloth draped over the child and the pot to concentrate the vapors, maybe some honey to coat the throat. Simple, inexpensive, effective. But the parents didn't know to come to her, and she hadn't known to go to them. She cries then, sitting among the frost-killed remains of her summer abundance, crying for a child she'd never met, for a life that could have been saved, for a system that values regulation over compassion, licensing over healing. The bees are mostly dormant, clustered in their skeps for warmth. The garden is dormant too, resting, waiting for spring. But Elunid wonders if spring will come, if healing will ever again be freely given and gratefully received, if care will ever again be its own reward rather than a licensed, taxed, regulated commodity. She doesn't have answers. She just sits, growing cold herself, until Branwen comes to find her and leads her gently inside, wrapping her in blankets, brewing her a tea from some of those jarred herbs, mothering the mother, healing the healer, continuing the practice of care even in a world that's made it so much harder than it should be. Let that image rest with you now. The winter garden, the grieving healer, the jars of unused medicine lining silent shelves, potential care waiting for permission that may never come. And now, for our final drift, let your mind carry you to the village well, where even water, simple, essential water, could not escape the price tag. Water, the most basic necessity, the thing your body needs more urgently than food, more fundamentally than shelter. You can survive weeks without eating, but only days without water. Every cell in your body depends on it, every function requires it. Water is life itself, liquid and essential. In our medieval village, let's return to England, to a place called Littlebrook, around the year 1300, there's a well. It's been there longer than anyone remembers, perhaps dug by the Romans when they occupied these lands 1,000 years before, or perhaps by the Saxons who came after, or perhaps by people whose names have been completely forgotten by time. The well is deep, stone-lined, reliable. Even in the driest summers, it never completely fails. The water is cold and sweet, filtered through layers of earth and rock until it emerges clear and pure. In a time before anyone understood germ theory or water treatment, this particular well is known for being good water. People who drink from it stay healthier than people who drink from streams or shallow ponds. The well sits at the center of the village, not geographically but functionally. Everyone comes here, multiple times a day, carrying buckets and leather bags and clay jugs. It's a meeting place, a news exchange, a social hub. Early morning, women come to draw water for their household's daily needs. There's a rhythm to it, a protocol that's never been written down but everyone knows. You wait your turn, you help lower the bucket if the person before you is elderly or very young, you exchange greetings and information. Did you hear about Margaret's baby? Came 2 weeks early but healthy, thanks be. The weather's turning, we'll have rain by evening. Has anyone seen Thomas's goat? Broke through the fence again. Midday, children come with smaller containers, sent on errands, turning the task into a game, racing each other back home, trying not to slosh too much water out. Evening. Men sometimes come, those who work close by, pausing to drink deeply from the communal cup that hangs on a hook by the well. It's wooden, worn smooth by thousands of hands, big enough to hold a generous serving. No one owns it. It belongs to the well or to everyone, which amounts to the same thing. The well asks nothing of you except that you maintain it. Once a year, in spring, there's a communal work day when everyone who's able helps clean it. They lower someone young and brave down into the depths with ropes, and they pull up the accumulated sediment and whatever debris has fallen in over the year, leaves, small stones, once memorably a pewter cup that someone had dropped. They inspect the stones, repairing any that have loosened, ensuring the well's integrity for another year. Afterward, there's always a small celebration, because maintaining the well is important work, communal work, work that keeps everyone alive. Someone brings bread, someone else brings cheese, there's beer passed around, and people sit near the well they've just cleaned, drinking water that tastes all the sweeter for knowing they've ensured its continuation. The well is also the site of ceremonies. New babies are brought here, not quite a baptism but a welcoming, an introduction to the community. Marriages are celebrated here. The couple drinks from the communal cup together, symbolizing their joining. When someone dies, the funeral procession passes by the well, acknowledging the connection between water and life, life and death, the cycles that connect everyone. There's even a superstition that the well grants wishes. People drop small offerings into it, a bent nail, a pretty pebble, a scrap of ribbon, and make silent prayers. Please let the harvest be good. Please let my daughter's cough ease. Please let me find love. The well keeps all these hopes in its dark depths, saying nothing, providing water regardless of the wishes made, indifferent and generous at once. This is how it's been for generations. The well is as much a part of Little Brook as the church, as the village green, as the road that leads to the next village. It's a constant, a given, something you don't really think about until you're thirsty, and then you think, the well. And you go, and you drink, and you're satisfied. Until 1305, when everything changes. The lord of the manor, we'll call him Edward because it's a popular name in this period, has returned from travels. He's been to London, seen how things work in the capital, learned about new methods of estate management. He's enthusiastic, full of ideas, determined to modernize his holdings and maximize their value. He looks at the village well with fresh eyes. Fresh, calculating eyes. The well sits on his land. Technically, everything sits on his land. He's the Lord. But he's never before thought of the well as an asset, a resource that could be monetized. Now he does. He proposes a water tax. A very small one, he emphasizes, barely noticeable. Just a farthing per household per month. That's a quarter of a penny, almost nothing. Surely everyone can afford that? The villagers are stunned. Tax the well? Tax water? The idea is so foreign, so fundamentally wrong, that at first they can't quite formulate arguments against it. It's like proposing to tax air, or sunshine, or rain. But Edward has arguments prepared. The well requires maintenance, doesn't it? And that maintenance benefits him not at all. He has his own well within his manor compound. So really, when villagers use the village well, they're using his resource, his property, and should compensate him for the privilege. It's only fair. The word fair is doing a lot of work in that sentence, work it cannot support. The village protests, collectively at first. They present their case. The well has always been common. We maintain it ourselves. We've never paid before. It's water, my lord, just water. Edward is unmoved. He's consulted with his legal advisors, and they assure him he's within his rights. The well is on his land, ergo it's his well, ergo he can charge for access. The law supports him. The king's courts would support him if it came to that. A few villagers refuse to pay. They draw water anyway, definitely. Edward stations a guard by the well. He has to pay the guard, of course, which eats into his projected profits, but it's a matter of principle now. The guard enforces payment. No farthing, no water. Those who refuse must walk 3 miles to the next village, where there's a stream they can draw from. 3 miles there, 3 miles back, carrying heavy containers of water. It's exhausting, time-consuming, and the stream water isn't as clean as the well water. People start getting sick. Most villagers, faced with the choice between paying and this punishing alternative, pay. They scrape together their farthings, resenting every one, and draw their water under the guard's watchful eye. The communal cup disappears. The guard removes it, saying that if people want a drink, they must pay first, and 1 cup shared among everyone makes it too easy to cheat. The social atmosphere around the well changes completely. No more lingering chats. No more helping each other, no more sense of community. It's transactional now. Pay, draw water, leave. The guard is uncomfortable with his role but needs the work. The villagers are angry but need the water. Everyone is trapped in a system that serves no one except Edward, and even he finds that the revenue is less than expected after paying the guard's wages. The spring cleaning tradition ends. Why would villagers volunteer to maintain a well they must pay to use? That's the Lord's responsibility now, surely, since he claims ownership. But Edward doesn't organize a cleaning. He's busy with other matters, and besides, the well still functions adequately. Over time, it functions less adequately. Sediment accumulates. The water becomes slightly cloudy. The flow slows. No one addresses it because responsibility has become unclear, or rather too clear. It's Edward's well now, let him maintain it. But Edward doesn't. And the well, untended, begins the slow process of degradation that will, over years, render it less reliable, less clean, less valuable than it was when it was cared for communally. There's a young woman in the village named Eleanor. She was born the year the water tax began, so she's never known the well as a commons. To her, it's always been something you pay for, something guarded, something that belongs to the Lord. She hears older people talk about drawing water freely, about the communal cup and the spring cleaning celebrations, and it sounds like a fairy tale, like something too good to be real. When Eleanor is 20, there's a drought. The well level drops dangerously low. Edward, worried about his revenue stream, restricts access further. Only 2 containers per household per day. The guard enforces this strictly. It's not enough water. Not for drinking and cooking and washing and all the things a household needs. People are thirsty, genuinely thirsty, in a village built around a well, because access to water has been artificially constrained. Some villagers start collecting rainwater in barrels, hoarding it, using it sparingly. Others walk to that distant stream despite the drought having reduced it to a trickle. A few try digging their own shallow wells, though most fail to reach water or produce only muddy seepage. The situation is untenable. Even Edward sees it, eventually. He lifts the 2-container restriction, but the damage is done. The village's relationship to its water source has been permanently altered from gift to commodity, from commons to property, from abundance to scarcity even when there's physically enough water for everyone. Eleanor, standing by the well one dry summer evening, waiting in line to pay for her water, looks at the ancient stones and tries to imagine a time when people approached this place without guards, without payment, without restriction. She can't quite picture it. The world she lives in has always been bounded by ownership and access, always requiring coins to meet basic needs. An old woman, Agnes, yes, the same one from the forest chapter, impossibly old now but still alive, stands behind Eleanor in line. She remembers everything: the common forest, the village mill, the feast days, the healing garden, and yes, the free well. She remembers when all of these things existed in a web of mutual support and shared resources. It wasn't perfect, Agnes says suddenly, to no one in particular. The old ways. We still got sick, still went hungry in bad years, and still died too young. But we were thirsty together, you understand? Not thirsty because someone decided our thirst could be profitable. Eleanor doesn't really understand, but she nods politely, pays her farthing, draws her water, and walks home carefully so as not to spill a drop of what she's purchased. That night, Eleanor dreams of a well with no guard, no fee, no restriction. In her dream, she drinks and drinks, the water cold and sweet and infinite, and when she wakes, she's crying though she doesn't know why. The well stands in the center of Littlebrook, stone and deep and ancient. It holds water still, will hold water for centuries more. But what it holds has changed, not in chemical composition but in meaning. It's no longer the village's heart but its marketplace, no longer a commons but a commodity, no longer a place of gathering but of transaction. And this, more than any physical drought, is the real thirst, the dry ache for a time when resources were shared, when needs were met communally, when access to life's essentials didn't require permission or payment. The well remembers, though, in its dark depths, along with all those small offerings, the bent nails and pretty pebbles and scraps of ribbon. It holds the memories of when it was free, when children played around its stones without supervision, when the wooden cup hung there for anyone to use, when drawing water was just drawing water, an action so simple and essential it didn't require thought, certainly didn't require coins. Maybe somewhere, in some corner of the world, there are still such places. Wells that belong to no one and everyone. Forests you can walk through freely. Ovens that bake bread for communities. Healers who give care without licenses. Feast days that celebrate abundance rather than purchasing power. Or maybe not. Maybe the lesson of history is that everything common eventually becomes enclosed, everything free eventually gains a price, everything shared eventually becomes property. Or maybe, and let this thought drift with you into sleep, maybe the lesson is something else. Maybe it's that the commons never fully dies, it just waits. Waits in the memories of old women who remember. Waits in the dreams of young women who've never known it but long for it anyway. Waits in the ancient stones of wells and the deep roots of forest trees and the recipes written on scraps of parchment and the stories told by firelight. Waiting for a time when people remember that some things, water and air and bread and healing and community and joy, belong to everyone or they belong to no one. And with that thought, with that hope, let yourself drift now into your own deep well of rest. Let the stories settle like sediment, filtering down through layers of consciousness until they reach that aquifer of sleep where everything is held and nothing is lost. Sweet dreams, dear friends. May your rest be deep and restorative, uninterrupted and free. And if you peacefully drifted off somewhere in these tales of commons lost and remembered, tell me in the comments when you wake. Tell me which story caught you, which moment made you pause, which medieval injustice made you think about our modern world. Until tomorrow night, or the next night you need a gentle story to carry you towards sleep, I'll be here, waiting with more tales from history's quiet corners. Good night. Sleep well. Dream of common lands and shared tables and wells without guards. This is a boring history for sleep, fading now into silence, letting you rest.